The morning she stepped onto my land, the sky was wide and mercilessly blue, as if it had never known a storm. Yet she walked toward me like someone carrying thunder in her chest. Her shoes were dusty from the long road, her fingers trembling even though the sun was warm, and her eyes held a quiet desperation I had seen only once before, on the day her father lost everything. She stopped a few feet away from the old wooden fence, lifted her chin with fragile courage, and said she had come to repay her father's debt. And without fully understanding why, I heard myself reply, asking if she would like to stay. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that happen in daylight, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Midnight Tales. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps them reach hearts that need them most. Her name was Alina Moreau. I remembered her as a thin teenager with braids and scraped knees who used to follow her father across the fields, laughing as if the world belonged to her. Her father, Bernard Moreau, had been a proud man, too proud, perhaps. 5 years ago, a season of drought had broken him. The crops failed, the cattle grew thin, and he borrowed money from me to keep his farm alive. I gave it without hesitation because we were neighbors, because in small towns you survive by holding each other up. But the rains never returned that year. Bernard's health collapsed under the weight of failure and shame, and before winter arrived, he was gone. The debt remained like a scar across the land. Alina had left town after the funeral. People whispered she had found work in the city, that she sent money home to her mother until her mother too passed away from grief and illness. I hadn't seen her since. And now here she was, standing in the late morning light, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face older than her years but still carrying the softness of someone who had not allowed bitterness to take root. She told me she had saved enough to begin repaying what her father owed. Not all at once, she admitted, but she would work on my farm, take whatever wages I offered, and hand most of it back until every last cent was settled. Her voice did not shake when she spoke about the debt, but it faltered when she mentioned her father's name. I could see the weight she had carried for years, the belief that she must fix what he could not, that love meant paying for the past in full. The farm around us was alive with midday sounds. Cows grazed lazily in the bright green field beyond the fence. The old barn stood steady against the horizon, its red paint faded but proud. Swallows dipped through the air. Life had continued, indifferent to human sorrow. I had managed to expand the land over the years, adding new fences, repairing the barn roof, even buying more livestock. On paper, I had profited from that dark season. But inside, I had always felt something unfinished whenever I passed the boundary that once separated my land from Bernard's. When she offered to work, I saw not a debtor but a daughter trying to stitch together the torn fabric of her family's honor. I told her she could stay in the small cottage near the orchard, the one we used for seasonal workers. It wasn't much, just a narrow bed, a chipped wooden table, and a window that faced the sunrise, but it was dry and safe. She hesitated before accepting, as though generosity frightened her more than hardship. The first weeks were not easy for her. Farm work is honest but unforgiving. The sun shows no mercy to soft hands. By midday, her palms blistered. Her shoulders ached from hauling feet and mending fences. I often found her staring across the fields, lost in thought, perhaps. Replaying memories of her father teaching her how to tie a proper knot or how to read the clouds for signs of rain. But she never complained. Every evening, she handed me a small envelope with part of her wages, insisting I keep it toward the debt. I began to notice something else, something unexpected. The farm felt different with her there. She rose before dawn and hummed softly as she worked. She spoke gently to the animals, and they seemed calmer around her. The orchard, which had struggled the previous year, began to flourish under her careful pruning and patient watering. It was as if her presence brought a quiet restoration, not just to the land but to the air itself. One afternoon, under a bright sun that cast sharp shadows across the fields, a storm rolled in without warning. Dark clouds gathered fast, the wind bending the tall grass almost flat. We rushed to secure the livestock, shouting instructions over the roar of thunder. A section of fencing near the pasture snapped, and a few cattle bolted toward the open road. Without thinking, Alina ran after them, her boots slipping in the mud as rain poured down in heavy sheets. I chased after her, heart pounding. She managed to guide the frightened animals back toward the barn, using only her voice and steady movements, just as her father once had. By the time we secured the gate, both of us were drenched, breathing hard, mud streaked across our clothes. She looked at me then, rain dripping from her lashes, and for the first time I saw not a grieving daughter but a woman strong in her own right. That evening, as the storm cleared and sunlight returned in golden streaks, I sat at my kitchen table with the envelopes she had given me over the weeks. They felt heavier than their contents. I realized that accepting her money no longer felt right. The debt had begun as an act of trust between neighbors. It had turned into a burden she carried alone. And now, watching her fight the storm beside me, I understood that she had already repaid more than numbers could measure. The next morning, with the day bright and calm, I walked her to the edge of the orchard. I told her that her father's debt was forgiven. Not because I pitied her, not because I had grown wealthy enough to ignore it, but because she had restored something far greater than money. She had brought life back to the farm in ways that could not be counted. Her eyes filled with tears she had clearly tried to hold back for years. The guilt she had worn like armor finally cracked. I told her she was welcome to stay. Not as a debtor, not even as a worker bound by obligation, but as a partner in the land if she wished. The offer hung between us in the warm daylight. It was not charity, it was recognition. The farm had space for both of us, and perhaps we both needed a new beginning shaped not by loss but by choice. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked across the fields where sunlight shimmered on wet grass, where the cattle grazed peacefully again, where her father's memory no longer felt like a wound but like a root beneath the soil. When she finally nodded, it was with a smile that carried both sorrow and hope. Months later, the farm thrived more than it ever had. The orchard produced its sweetest harvest. Laughter returned to the yard in the middle of the day. And every time I saw her walking confidently across the fields, I was reminded that sometimes repayment does not come in coins or paper, but in courage, in loyalty, in the willingness to rebuild what was broken. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and whether you believe in second chances. Special request. Comment the word, forgiven, if you believe that kindness can rewrite someone's destiny. Because in the end, it was never about a debt. It was about a daughter who refused to let her father's last chapter define her own, and about the simple, powerful truth that sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is the freedom to stay.